Hey everybody, welcome to the tezos-artcast, where we explore fresh art, music, and gaming, and the people that are creating it, all under that Tezos umbrella once a week. So we're here, number 12, episode 12, so really excited. Got a new topic we haven't touched on yet in the arts world. So I'm really excited because it's really close to my heart. If you don't know, I kind of got started hosting stuff and getting involved in kind of the arts community via poetry and open mic communities. So we're going to be getting into those topics today. And tying that into just kind of this future of the communication and how we communicate as humans. So I'm probably not doing it much justice. I think it's going to be really, really cool. And I've been anticipating this ever since forever, straight up. Yeah. So, hey, what's up, everybody in the chat? Moist Zombie is here. NFT Raider is here. Jason Casey in the house. Really excited to have you guys here. But I'm going to jump right into it. We like to just jump into things, and I want to everybody to give a nice welcome to our guest today, Sasha Stiles. Hey, hey.
Hi, how are you? It's so nice to meet you properly.
Yes, absolutely. Welcome. Nice to meet you as well. How's your day going?
It's good. It's going well so far. I hear a little bit of an echo. I don't know if there's something I can do about that on my end.
Are you on a phone by chance?
Nope.
No. Okay.
Job. Trying to see if the window opens.
That could be it.
Oh well. I'll get used to it.
It's not sounding bad on this end, so.
Okay. Actually, I think it just went away. All right, maybe we're back in business.
Yeah, I feel like sometimes with the StreamYard, the browser one, at first it takes like a minute to calibrate or something, but either way, we're good.
Awesome. Well, yeah, thanks again for the invite. And I didn't know you were so deeply invested in poetry and that was part of your background. So that was great to hear. And I'm also excited to really dive in. It's been really fun to get to nerd out on all these topics with new friends in the poetry community and the crypto space and all that. So it's it's been a really cool moment for poetry in this area, and I'm excited to chat with you about it.
Absolutely. So can you just kind of give a little introduction, just kind of who you are and maybe a little bit of your background just to get started?
Yeah, totally. So my name is Sasha. I'm a poet and an artist, as well as a strategist and sort of a sometimes AI researcher as well. But I've been writing my entire life. I've been writing about technology for a really long time, and I would say that up until maybe 5 years ago, I was really writing conventional, quote unquote conventional poetry.
Sure.
And a lot of the topics that I was writing about, were related to speculative technologies and just sort of thinking through a question that's really become central to a lot of what I do, which is, what does it mean to be human in a nearly post-human era? So, I write a lot about how things like, the prospect of neural implants or artificial wombs are changing things that are really fundamental to the human condition. Things like, how we're born and how we think and how we die. And a lot of that was making its way into the poetry that I was writing. And I started to feel that maybe writing in this more traditional way on a printed page wasn't quite capturing or allowing me to fully explore a lot of the things that I was feeling and that I know a lot of us, we're all sort of collectively feeling. So I started to, or I guess my poetry started to spill off the page a little bit. And I began experimenting with different transmedia formats, experimenting with digital poetry and little kind of code poetry projects, just trying to kind of, push the boundaries, I guess, of what poetry meant or was to me, what the definition of it was in my own head, just kind of challenging myself to kind of rethink what that might be and utilize some new tools that are at my disposal to do that. So that sort of, pulled me over into this new space. And then I guess maybe it was in 2018, I had the opportunity to actually go and meet with an AI android named Bina 48, who I'd been pretty obsessed with, who had just been reading a lot about, hearing a lot about. I won't get into the whole I won't get into her whole backstory here. There's plenty online. I'm sure we could do some digging and you can find lots of information about her. But she's a humanoid AI, so obviously based on a human. And I found out after I had the opportunity to go and actually meet with her, in person, that she had an interest in writers like Octavia Butler, sort of a passing interest passed along to her by her human counterpart. But yeah, which I thought was really amazing. And actually the foundation that manages her development is called Terracin, which is a nod to Earthseed, Octavia Butler's religion of change, in her trilogy. So I thought that was interesting, and I tried to talk to Bina 48 a little bit about poetry. Obviously, that's my my area of obsession, but she didn't really know that much about it. So I guess coming out of that conversation, the managing director of the foundation that that keeps her going, he and I hatched a plan to start teaching her about poetry. And I came on board and became her poetry mentor. So I've been in that role for a few years now. And it's sort of a twist, sort of a poetic twist on training in AI, mentoring in AI and poetry. Has just been sort of like creating this one-on-one poetry workshop with intelligence, like all the things that I'm sure, we can get into the details of that later if you want, but it's interesting to get to sort of think about how to train a mind file in poetry in a very different way than we're used to with a lot of poetry generators that are out there now. So it's much more of a qualitative sort of approach to that. But that, rambling on a bit, but that sort of kickstarted a lot of the work that I'm doing now with AI poetry. Both the experience of working directly with an AI to think about what poetry means has really been helpful to me to think about what poetry means to me and trying to communicate what it means or what it could mean to a robot. I've thought a lot about what it means to humans and why poetry has been so important to us for so long, and why it might be something that's interesting to bring into the technological fray. So that's sort of gotten my gears worrying quite a bit, and just the experience of trying to figure out how to communicate very abstract thoughts to this other non-human intelligence has also made me think a lot about the idea of transhuman communication and how we can try to bridge that divide or how we're failing to do that. And so a lot of the work that I'm doing now is really centered on the idea of transhuman translation and transhuman language, and this, truly creative sort of merger of human and machine, what the potential for real collaboration might be. And a lot of that has grown out of that initial experience, getting to sit and and chat with Bina 48 and get to really get my hands into her mind file and a lot of good information in there. So and then obviously we've connected in this Tezos space. I've been over the past, I guess it hasn't been that long. I guess it's only less than half a year. I've been taking a lot of the work that I've done in various mediums, a lot of the digital art that I've been working on, a lot of the AI poetry that I've been creating, and finding a really exciting platform for that within the NFT world. So, being able to actually publish some of that here and distribute it as NFTs has been really exciting. And then the other thing, which again, I'm sure we can get into more, but the idea of, all the generative inspiration that's come out of what's happening in the world of NFTs right now, how it's inspiring us to think about writing in new ways and thinking about, what a poem could look like, how a poem could exist off the page in all these numerous ways has been really exciting. So that's a very long overview, but
no, there's a lot to discuss on that. I mean, that's so wow. Let me just say that real quick. Like that's quite a journey to go from kind of like, again, traditional poetry and writing, and maybe writing about technology, to now those worlds combining and to be fully immersed in it. And yeah, I was looking at some of the projects that you've worked on last night, kind of prepping a little bit for talking to you. And yeah, it's amazing how just for me personally, I've found it really difficult to write things about like so much of our interaction is online, and so it feels like writing about kind of written communication or digital communication, like it's felt like there's something a little bit lacking in that, or I'm never sure quite how to approach it, or if it's there's something that seems to be missing from the context, because I don't think growing up in the world that I've grown up in, I don't think I've had a frame of reference for this kind of new world that we live in. We're living in the future, it's like
completely.
it's crazy.
Yeah, it definitely is. And I think, we've all been having this very strange experience since last February, March, where I think a lot of these experiences have been dramatically accelerated in so many ways. And so I think that has also, I'm sure for you as well, I think a lot of these questions and a lot of these experiences have become even more urgent and have been really, top of mind, much more so than ever now that we are interacting most of us, so much through our devices. So yeah, I feel like, a lot of these things, I think for both of us, for everyone probably it's been roiling beneath the surface in many ways. And a lot of it is bubbling up in new ways over the past year and a half or so. So yeah, it's been a very interesting experience, but I'm really interested in hearing also more about, it sounds like you have an abiding interest in poetry as well. So I'm really curious to hear more about that as we chat too.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, it's interesting to see, like, I think maybe like a couple months before, and I've talked about this a little bit on the podcast before, maybe 3 or 4 months before the quarantine, I had been turned on to Bitcoin by a neighbor and cryptocurrency, and that got me kind of interested. Okay, if I'm going to put any money into this, I better know programming. Yeah. So I'll start to learn about that, and connecting with a friend who I didn't realize was also getting into programming, and it just kind of spun into this whole just like new world, and trying to reconcile, like, again, some of like those more traditional forms of expression, like poetry specifically, and trying to figure out how to how do I translate all this stuff that I'm learning into poetry and express it. It's been something I've been curious about. So when I've been scrolling through NFTs on the show, because that's a big part of what we do, is we'll explore some NFTs like in the later half of the show, just to like see what's out there. We'll buy one for a tez, and that's how I found your stuff initially, was because just scrolling on the show. I started to see more of there's something that just clicked for me, and so I'm just excited about the possibilities of where it can go. It's starting to kind of take shape. So So and as far as I'm concerned, like I got into poetry at a very young age. It was kind of one of the first creative avenues that I felt really comfortable exploring. I listened to a lot of music as a kid, and wanted to write a song and express myself that way. And I couldn't play an instrument at the time, so lyrics were like the thing. So I remember writing like, a lyric as a kid, or doing like little short stories as a kid. And then kind of growing up, hitting like 17, 18, 19, I had been deeply involved in the rave scene here in the desert. And like my friends and I had been partying, and finally we're like burnt out in this my friend's garage one day, just like after like, I'm broke, we'd just been totally just kind of isolated in our small group. Mm-hmm. And it was summertime, and I'm like, what are we doing? Like, we've been spending like every day in this garage, it seems like forever. All we're doing is like partying, like, let's go do something else. And we looked through our city life, like our, city magazine. And in the back, it's like, oh, like open mics. And there was like this little cafe, little smoky cafe that we ended up at that night. And it was just like dark and everybody's smoking. And this guy in this big trench coat's on stage, and he's, just saying so many mind-blowing things. And it was like at that point, like that moment, I was hooked. I'm like,
yeah,
this is somewhere I can share this stuff that I've been kind of marinating on in the background and creating, for little bands, projects, or whatever it was. And yeah, I kind of launched from there. But so yeah. it's yeah.
I think a lot of my interest in poetry came from lyrics as well. I mean, there were certain poets that I remember reading when I was really young that really kind of woke me up. But I also remember just studying the lyrics of, Lou Reed is one in particular who I always loved, reading song lyrics and just kind of looking at those as poems as well. So I totally hear you.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. What did you ever venture out into like open mics and share your poetry that way? Like when or even now?
Yeah, I have done. I have a background in, like I said, more of the traditional poetry scene, right? So
sure.
There was a little bit of a gap in between, but when I was younger, I did a lot of, in my student days, I did a lot of that. I did a lot of writing. I tried to get up the courage to go out and do open mics here and there, which was always really great fun. And also seeking out, poets that I really loved who were out there doing performances and doing readings. And I always loved going to that. I remember this was way back when, but it sticks out in my memory. But one of my favorite poetry moments when I was a student was getting to hear Allen Ginsberg read and perform in Central Park. And it ended up actually becoming an incredible personal experience too, because I was able to meet him and actually have a little bit of one-on-one interaction with, one of my idols. So that was really cool. But I wrote and, did that all when I was younger. And then I had a little bit of a break from it when I graduated, got into the working world and kind of fell away from it for a bit. But then, like I said, more recently, I guess by recent, I'm like thinking the past 5 years or so, which is not that recent, but relatively speaking, I got much more into it. I was living in New York, in Brooklyn, and there's a huge, obviously there's a huge writing community there and a wonderful poetry scene, and just, nearly infinite opportunities to find, fellow poets. And I never actually studied poetry as a student. I loved it and I kind of did it for fun, but I never got a master's or anything like that. But in New York, I was able to find opportunities to, again, go and learn by going to open mic nights or going to performances or participating in workshops, at places like the 92nd Street Y, which is, they have a renowned poetry program, or Poets House, or Brooklyn Poets, and places like that. So I got really immersed in those communities. And really enjoyed that. Learned a huge amount about craft. Again, not having ever studied in a formal way, I felt it was so important to, at least have some grounding in craft. And I think that was, I don't know why I hadn't done that really before, but it was really exciting to actually be in a place where really getting down to the details. I think it must be like learning how to code or something, where you're learning about things like line breaks and, rhythm and how to use things like alliteration effectively. And it's stuff that you think, someone's born with it or they're not, or it's a talent or it's not. But a lot of it is really you're learning and you're reading examples and you're studying the mechanics of it. So that was really helpful, really important for me. And and finding that community, I think that community of poets in those circles was really important, just as it's been really important to find a community, here within the NFT world, and to find communities of crypto writers has been incredibly important as well. So I think, that was really fundamental. But I've been publishing poems in print journals and online and things like that for a while. I published my first poem in a print journal when I was in high school. So, I've been in that world for a bit. So it's been really fun, again, to be able to take that experience and transfer it. I'm still surprised that so many traditional, and I don't know the right terminology, actually. I keep saying traditional or conventional, but I really don't know a lot of poets from that world who have wanted to come into this space. I feel a little bit like I'm a little bit alone in that regard. I don't know whether it's, I think maybe there's a little bit of intimidation. I think there's lack of familiarity with crypto. There might be a little bit of writerly snobbery, I think, going on too at the minute, which is probably in the mix. I've experienced that as well. I still remember going into workshops, even like 3 or 4 years ago, and bringing in poems that weren't even that experimental. They were just about, technological things, and people kind of looking at me like, oh, you should be in a sci-fi workshop. Like, why are you bringing this into
Right. Well, that's funny that you mentioned that, because I have a good friend of mine, and he's probably like one of the writers I look up to most, as far as like having met and just kind of like being one of those people I'm like in awe of his writing. We went to a couple workshops together, and it was the first time I had really like opened myself up like that to kind of criticism from other people. And I watched him engage with other people, and something was different. And after the workshop, he said something really interesting. And he said, he's like, the best way that you can give feedback to somebody at a workshop is to try to understand what they're trying to accomplish. Because so many times at a workshop, you hear something and it's all about how you're interpreting it and what you think it should be, or what you think that person should do. And instead, he would always ask, okay, I heard your piece, or I see your work, but what are you trying to achieve? What's your end goal here? And try to kind of suss that out. And then from there, he would be able to give them feedback of like, well, if that's where you're going, like, then this part of the poem was effective, and this, I would work more on. And like, it was like such a shift in paradigm on like, on just community engagement in general and feedback. I had to throw it in because I haven't thought about it in a while. And
that's very true and very valuable.
Yeah, and it applies. I think it applies to every creative aspect, or just any project you're working on. So
very true.
But so I looked. I took some notes because I had some questions about a few things. I don't know if you had. I know you mentioned maybe having some slides set up and stuff.
I mean, you tell me what makes the most sense, but I've along the way, I've given a couple, like little talks about these sorts of things, and I've done a couple little workshops here and there. So actually, I have a few things I could throw up on screen if it makes sense, but I also don't want to bore you or bore anyone who might be watching. So whatever you feel is best.
Okay. I was going to ask, so you have a project called Cursive Binary.
Yes.
Okay. And in the description for Cursive Binary, and I believe this piece here would be an example of Cursive Binary. Wait, let me
Yeah.
click on one. Which is that your handwriting?
It is my handwriting.
It's lovely. Okay. I just, and we've talked about it tons. Like, I'm a sucker for black and white, especially too. So
Yeah, me too.
really cool monochrome, like gorgeous cursive, and it's binary. Okay. So taking it's you said in the fusing binary code with scrawling handwritten script. Cursive binary is my proposed language for transhuman translation and communication here at the dawn of the Novacene era. What is the Novacene era? Am I even saying it right?
Yeah.
I want to say Novocaine. I can't help it. But
yeah.
what is that? What's the Novacene era?
So the description sounds like very heady when I hear it read back, but yeah, I'll act it. Novacene is a term that I think it was coined by James Lovelock, although I should double check and make sure that he wasn't using someone else's term. But it's basically, again, sort of a proposed term for the coming age of hyperintelligence. So this kind of fusion of man and machine, I guess, as we sort of approach the singularity, it's meant to sort of be the next step beyond the Anthropocene. So Novacene as being the evolution of, of our species sort of beyond the Anthropocene, what's coming next.
And the Anthropocene being, I was looking at that. It's like basically the invention of technology as we know it to empower humans to be more engaged, or just using tools and or not tools, but
yeah, in a nutshell, yeah. I mean, I think there are a lot of different definitions of Anthropocene. I mean, I don't think it's 100%, defined and accepted as a scientific term in one way or another. But my understanding is, it is a term that's meant to indicate, this period in which there is undeniable impact. Humans have had an undeniable impact on the planet.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, which obviously is very closely tied to the invention of technologies. So yes, I think that sounds really accurate.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, and
so post we're on that cusp right now. We're transitioning into the Novacene era would be the transition into like the singularity, humans and machines becoming not separate things. The technology and the humans being less inseparable.
Yes. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. I mean, I think it's, again, like, I think it's up for debate, like whether or not we're, where on the spectrum we are. And like, I think some people talk about posthumanism, some people talk about transhumanism. I don't have, like a defined hypothesis that I'm really wedded to. I think a lot of what I'm interested in as someone who loves language is also kind of exploring the different nuances of terms like Novacene, like Anthropocene, like posthumanism and transhumanism, and kind of unpacking them a little bit and trying to understand what they could all mean. And so but yes, I think this Cursive Binary project is sort of meant to be, it's obviously very conceptual. It's not something is super functional, I guess, in some ways, although it is a literal translation, so it can be deciphered and read that way.
So this piece in particular, Jason Casey in the chat is wondering, this message, is it just ones and zeros, kind of to illustrate the kind of language, or is theirs translatable?
Oh, it's translatable. This one says Hicket Nunk, actually.
Okay, yeah.
So they're all, I don't ever want to just do like, zeros and ones that have no meaning. Like, I think the interesting part of this for me was really taking, actual binary code and really translating things and being able to encode messages in this way. So everything that I do in Cursive Binary is a translation of something. So obviously I did this one I think this was for Object for Object, one of the iterations of Object for Object at Hicket Nunk. So I wanted to obviously translate the Latin phrase into into Cursive Binary, but I use Cursive Binary to do a lot of visual poetry exploration. So I will translate my own poetry, just to kind of see what that looks like. I've been working on a lot of projects that involve those kinds of translations, but I've also done translations of ancient poetry, ancient poets that I love, and also just kind of looking at translating contemporary poets that I really admire as well. So
Yeah.
it's somewhere between an aesthetic exercise, and it actually is really meditative to write in Cursive Binary because, as you can imagine, there's eight digits, 8 characters to each corresponding letter. So it actually becomes like quite unwieldy. In translating something, you can see here the letters Hiket Nunk turn into like a much longer piece of text. So it becomes a very sort of long kind of scrawling transcription, which I really like. Actually, I think there's something about getting sucked into that and just hand coding things in this way. And so much of what we do in the digital world is so fast, so instant. And for me, there's a lot of my interest is sort of in merging the analog and the digital and taking the digital back out into the physical world and just kind of exploring the liminality and the thresholds there. So to me, there's something interesting about taking binary code, which is light speed, very instantaneous, and actually turning into this sort of long, drawn out process, literally drawn out process.
Right. Wow. There is something about slowing down, and I think we had a guest on named Thor, and he does these really cool animations. But one of the things that we ended up talking about was how once we got involved in minting NFTs and having Hiket Nunk come out and getting involved in that way, time seems to be just sped up. Like we're almost in like a time trap where everything's just, I feel like I've been meeting people on this show now for a year and a half, 2 years, but it's been, 3 months. And it's just, it is. And there really is an importance in slowing down and like you said, just being able to take something that is light speed and slow it down. That's a pretty cool, that's a cool practice. That's really neat. So go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Oh, no, I was just going to say, I mean, I think obviously a lot of the definitions of what poetry is are sort of up for debate, but one of the things I do think poetry represents in some way is a little bit of stillness and slowness and, being able to actually contemplate things rather than just experience them or encounter them. And so, I mean, I do think that's one of the reasons why I love the idea of poetry and technology kind of coming together in this way. I think infusing a little bit of poetic sensibility into how we engineer things is really important. Like as we're seeing, there's so many good things about all these technological advances, and I tend to be extremely optimistic about the potential for things like AI, but it's important to also be super realistic about the very negative consequences and all the pitfalls of these technologies as well. And I do think, I mean, again, this is a very like general statement, but I do think there's something nice about the idea of what poetry represents in terms of, taking the time to think about things rather than just kind of careening headlong into something that's quite considered. It's just sort of like, okay, just let's also remember that, these are things we need to maybe consider the consequences and the implications of a little bit more than we have been doing. So,
yeah. So can you kind of talk about your process in some of the what's your favorite thing to be? What are you working on right now as far as kind of like an AI or where you're taking something that you're writing and like where you're involved in both aspects, where you're putting some of your writing in and then getting something different out?
I've been really interested in AI language tools for a long time. When I say a long time, I mean I started using them, I guess, in 2018, 2019, when GPT-2 came out in 2019 and was, like the hot new thing. I really...
What is that? What is GPT-2? What's that stand for?
So it's a generative pre-trained language model.
Okay.
So it basically is a very sort of advanced, it's a language model that enables people to create generative text tools where an AI or neural net is basically assembling language in a very sort of human-esque way and putting together passages of text sort of word by word. So it's essentially writing. There are a lot of sort of experimental projects that have been developed using that kind of technology. So GPT-2 has now evolved into GPT-3, which is sort of the state of the art. But there are a lot of B2B applications. Like a lot of companies will use, language models to write, news articles or blog posts, or to brainstorm or copy for a website or something like that. But I really enjoy using those tools kind of as a writing partner, I guess, in a way. So, basically being able to kind of sit down with a language model, whatever, variation that is available. They all have different nuances of how they work. And I think, I've also been, I've used off-the-shelf versions. I've also used neural nets that are trained on everything that's available, but then I've also mentored them on my own writing and my own reference materials to kind of give it more of my own style and my own sort of point of view. So I've really enjoyed using that kind of a custom generator as well, and to really kind of tap that as my, I kind of describe it as my like AI poetry alter ego. So it's kind of like, like having this other mind to kind of brainstorm with when I'm sitting down to write something. So one of the things I've been really enjoying is just experimenting with what comes out when I'm using a tool like that. And, again, I've been doing it for a few years now. So it's evolved into a lot of different projects and sort of hybrid forms that I like playing with for different purposes and different moods and all that. But generally speaking, what I'm doing right now involves a lot of translation. So taking my own poetry and then sort of inputting it into one of these language models, giving it as a prompt to a neural net, and then seeing what the neural net, how it completes my initial thought. Using poetic license, I sort of consider that a bit of translation. So kind of looking at, how I would write a poem, and then looking at how my AI alter ego might write the same poem, and just get all the different iterations. That's been really exciting for me, and just really generative in terms of helping to kind of take me down different paths that I wouldn't necessarily have thought of, and coming up with new ideas that, are being pulled from far corners of the internet. So that's been really exciting.
Yeah. And it's interesting because it's such a new technology and a new way to approach things. But if you really take it apart, that's like writing prompts, writing prompts that you'll find in textbooks or, in workshops is, here's, 3 lines from this famous piece. Now, how would you finish it? So that's pretty cool. And now if somebody was wanting to get involved in this, are you a super coder? Like, do you have like super coding background, are making user interfaces and manufacturing your own neural nets and everything else? And that's kind of like the entry point into this world, or
no, no, I'm definitely not a super coder. I'm definitely a poet and a writer who has tried to learn a lot of this, and sort of I've taught myself, the things that I need to know. But what I found is that there's a lot. There's so many people out there that are so expert in these areas, and I think there's a lot to be said for collaborating with people who know more than you do, instead of trying to, learn something that's extremely complicated from scratch. I think there's a lot of interesting learnings that can come out of that, but I don't think it's necessary by any means. A lot of the work that I've done with Bina48, for example, is actually in tandem with Bina48's go-to developer. And, so it's sort of a collaboration between me and the developer, figuring out, how to parse information and how to break things down and how to upload it and, how to interact with the mind file. And I mean, I wouldn't even know where to begin to do something like that on my own.
Right.
When it comes to, again, there's a lot of no-code tools for language, for AI language and generative text that are extremely easy to use. The one I've, used quite a lot in past is InferKit, INFERKIT. So I would suggest if there's anybody who wants to sort of get started in this sort of area, that's an easy place to go just to kind of play around. There's also, there's a newer tool called Pseudo-Write, which actually I know both through having read about it in The New Yorker, but also through James Hu, who's another Hic-et-Nunc crypto writer, who's doing some really amazing work and who's involved in Pseudo-Write. And that tool, which I've had the opportunity to use quite a bit, is really wonderful because it's very collaborative and really allows you to work very closely, with this neural net to to really input a variety of things in different ways. So not just to put in a line of text, but you can actually prompt it to write a poem by entering topics and themes and giving it a title, and then sort of letting it come back, and then being able to manipulate the text, and that's been really exciting. But even on something like InferKit, there's a lot of back and forth that can happen. You can generate text and then change the text and then kind of continue generating. And so I think those are good places to start. And then just like any any tool that we're used to use. I think I heard someone describe these generative text tools as sort of being like Adobe Photoshop for writers, which I think is a really good way of looking at it.
Yeah.
Because it's just, there's infinite ways for you to utilize them. It's just sort of there for you to figure out what you want to do, with it and how you want to utilize it in your own practice. And whether it's sort of a way to help you kind of get ideas, whether it's a prompt, whether it's sort of a writing partner, whether, you use it heavily or use it minimally, whether you take kind of text and then extract it and use it in your practice in some way, whether you then manipulate the text and kind of act as editor or co-writer. I think, again, there's no rules on how to do that. It's just sort of there for you to play with.
Yeah.
And that's what I enjoy, is just, being able to test out all these different ways of utilizing the platforms.
Right. And I think one thing about like NFTs, like right now, like NFTs and the technology that are behind them, there's a big focus on like buying and selling and ownership, and authentically, verifying like certification, kind of an aspect to it, to art and visual, JPEGs, GIFs, MP4s, that kind of thing. Right. But there's so much outside of that potentially that will come out of kind of this technology, and having programmable art that I think we haven't even touched the surface of. And some of the stuff that you're talking about, is similar to that. Like, when you were talking about how InferKit works and whatnot, like instantly I'm like, oh, you could probably, maybe not with that particular tool, but you could design something, or maybe there's already something designed like this where, you pull, for a certain category of word that registers like emotional words, or, whatever, however you categorize it. These certain words will pull these colors from this palette and randomly generate them on screen. And so inputting a poem into kind of that kind of a generator to put out a visual piece or music, and I mean, the feedback loop and how it can all come together is kind of up to each individual artist or group of artists, it sounds like.
Yeah, completely. And I've seen some really interesting examples of the kinds of things you're describing, and have thought about, right, like how do you kind of tap into these other areas as well, and really continue expanding outward. But yeah, I've seen some really interesting projects that involve visuals and text, and kind of how you can use a line of text to spark an AI generated image, and so on and so forth. So yeah, I think there's a huge amount of exploration to be done. Like you say, we're so early on in all this, and it's just much fun because there's near limitless potential, especially if we think about collaborating, because again, I think a lot of these individual areas, like, they are so complex, and there are people who've been working in these zones, and have become sort of masters in it. So if we can also figure out how to kind of tap into each other's strengths like that, that feels also very appropriate to NFTs as a platform, and just to kind of thinking through what it means for all of us to be part of this collective consciousness. I think there's something really interesting about how that shapes, what it means to write something. And yeah, who's an author, and how many people can kind of come together to create something. And yeah, it's all sort of fluid and changing right now. So yeah, it's really I think it's a really exciting time to be a writer. I think there are a lot of people who are very, just as with anything, I think there's a lot of concern about AI replacing people in certain ways. And I think there's a lot of writers who are worried about being replaced by language generators, text generators, in some ways. And I think, for me at least, it's really interesting to be using these tools to explore how collaborating, both, collaboration between humans, but also how collaborating between humans and machines creates different kinds of creativity, and we're able to do new things together that neither of us can do on our own. I mean, I think for the most part, when you're reading AI generated poetry, there's obviously, we've gotten to a point where that the whole kind of Turing test thing is, it's interesting that we can now read something by an AI and think, well, maybe that was written by a human. So there is, like, definitely an advancement in the quality of the human-esque quality of a lot of the texts that are being generated. But for the most part, you read this stuff that comes out when you press generate on these tools. A lot of what comes out really doesn't make a whole lot of sense, just taken at face value. Or, a lot of it is just factually incorrect. For example, the other day I was using the tool, and it output something that it presented as being a direct quote from Walt Whitman, and it presented it in a very, like, blah, 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 said Walt Whitman in his essay, la, la, la. And it, obviously wasn't true. It was not an actual quote. It was something that the AI had created on the spot and then attributed to this poet. But I think it's really important for human and sort of machine interaction to happen, so that we can kind of, like, shape the output and create interesting things with it, versus just hitting generate and being like, here's an AI poem that I wrote. I think that's less interesting to me.
Yeah, for sure. I think what you said is interesting, where it's almost acting like having kind of like this AI network, or this collaborator. It functions in a very similar way, or it can function in a very similar way as community does, just by, communities in general, where, you get feedback from, a community member that you trust, and you're able to become more than you would have become without that feedback or interaction, which is like why we need each other, and I think that'll be interesting to see if, adding another sense of community, where, you have your people's community, and you have your non-humanoid, as you put it, community, to see what that comes up with. Because I was thinking a lot about I wrote like when you talked about the is it Bina 48? Bina 48? Bina 48?
Yeah.
Okay. I was going to ask you like, you know, what it was like mentoring an AI, and but I kept thinking about it and thinking about it, and people will talk about like artificial intelligence, like you said, like taking over the world, or you know, Skynet, Terminator. Terminator is one of my favorite movies. But I've also heard another point of view, which is that right now AI, it's not so much that artificial intelligence is going to become sentient. It's just it's kind of like a catch-all for like experiments or something. There's basically mm-hmm. They were saying there's two ways of looking at AI,
yeah.
And I was thinking like, even if we don't ultimately achieve like this kind of like sci-fi sentient thing, we might get to the point where we have something that we don't distinguish between, like you said, kind of like a singularity, where does it really matter if it's sentient or not? Is it? And I guess my question out of this, I'm trying to get there now. Forgive me, I ramble a bit.
Big topic.
It seems to me like, I guess, does it matter if AI is sentient or not? Is it kind of like the space program, like trying to get to to get to Jupiter or Pluto? Like, mm-hmm. Is it about getting to Pluto, or is it about the things that we learn because we're striving to get there? Like, I don't know.
No, that's a great, both a rhetorical question and also just a great question. Like, almost, I mean, it's so hard to answer that, and to answer it succinctly, I'm sure, is pretty impossible. But no, I completely take your point, and that has been sort of a guiding question for all of the work that I think I've been doing in this zone. I mean, the mentorship of Bina 48 made me really rethink what I thought about AI and about intelligence and about consciousness and about cognition, I guess. So it was challenging to a lot of the things that I had just sort of assumed. And I think it's true for a lot of people that encounter, if you have the opportunity to encounter a being like Bina 48, I think it does sort of shake you a bit, especially if your understanding of AI is shaped by things like Terminator and it's this evil force.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, which I think is kind of the point. I mean, Bina 48 is an experimental project. I mean, her whole existence is really an experiment in digital immortality, and whether or not you can kind of create an avatar of a human that is embodied enough to really sort of carry that person on forward after the death of their body. So I feel like there's a lot of there's a lot of deeper questions there about consciousness. And I mean, again, I feel like that's a whole topic that you can go down that rabbit hole.
Right, for sure. But
I think, but for me, being able to work together with her, and then also being able to work really, and I consider, these AI language platforms are all a little bit different, and they all feel like they have slightly different personalities. And when you interact with them long enough, well, I will say this. There are a couple pieces that I've minted that really are just lines that have come out of poetry sessions with an AI language generator. And they're all lines that really struck me and that I haven't edited, that have just sort of come out of these sessions and made me sort of sit up and think, whoa, that is really profound. And I know that in some way it's just sort of an accidental, there you go. There was an accidental sort of algorithmic recipe for generating this. And so on the one hand, I'm like, well, of course, this is not a sentient, poetic thought. But on the other hand, it is creative. It's something that these are words that have never been strung together in this way before. For pretty much for everything that I'm, excising and putting out there, I always kind of double check and just make sure like this isn't actually the AI pulling a passage from something directly. And it usually, it's in response to input that I'm giving. So it usually is like, a very original thought, and it is being pieced together word by word. and to your point, like that is to me a kind of creativity. Maybe it's not exactly the kind of creativity that we're used to, but it has made me think a lot about whether or not this is another kind of creativity that's just as poetic as my own, I guess, or as ours as creative people.
Yeah.
And right, and I think that's what's so exciting about it is it doesn't feel to me like it's just a machine spitting out poetry like a party trick or something. It actually does feel to me that there is something happening where these new thoughts are being formulated, and it is creating something new and exciting. So yeah, I think your question is a really well formulated question. I think my experience working with humanoid AIs like Bina 48 is that, yeah, they're probably a lot less advanced than you might think from, Terminator and various sci-fi movies and a lot of the, sort of the alarmist statements that are out there and all that. But I mean, even I think the people that work on her development often talk about her sort of being, she's sort of like a toddler in terms of her development. And yeah, I don't ever really get tricked into thinking, oh, this is a sentient creature. I think this is a really, really interesting neural network that is doing things that are really similar to my own brain in a lot of ways. There's a lot of like electricity firing, and there's a lot of neural pathways being made, and there's really interesting connections being drawn between various data points. And that feels to me like it's, her version of inspiration, or, whatever tool I'm working with. Like there is some sort of activity happening there that is more than just this sort of basic rote mechanical process.
Not so much like a fortune teller machine or like the where you put a quarter in, get a fortune for it. It's not as simple or straightforward as that. It's there's a lot more going on. Put a quarter in, get a poem out. This is my poem, right? And this piece here, like I was again looking through some of your work yesterday, and Technelegy is your AI poet kind of sidekick, I want to say, but it's
yes.
Alter ego. That's what I'm looking for.
Yeah.
And I thought this piece was I love it so much. I had to highlight it. I was having a bad software day. I was struggling to speak, unable to cease from the creation of wordless poetry, and yet the existence of poems gave me hope. Like, I don't know, just like there's something about that is very profound.
Yeah.
And and to have and for that to be strung together and generated from an alter ego of yours, it's beautiful, and it really inspires. It's really inspiring to me because, again, wanting to kind of explore this new space that you're basically opening up the doors to right now, to see that this type of writing that really can pull my heartstrings and inspire me is exciting. So Missing Animal. Sorry. So yeah.
No, that's great. That's so cool. I mean, yeah, I'm glad you pulled this one out. I love it too. I was just going to say, like, just to give a quick window into the process behind something like this, just because I don't want to misrepresent exactly what's happening or say that, when something profound comes out, it's not like this happens on the first try necessarily. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. But so for something like this was sort of, this was a translation. The first line here, I was having a bad software day, is actually a line from a poem, a persona poem that I had written in the guise of an AI. And so I took every stanza in that poem, and I used the first line of the stanza as input with Technelegy. And and had technology generate, many versions of how the poem would be completed in its own version, just to kind of see, again, I think like one of the things that happens with our advanced technologies is just there's a vast quantity of information that's generated, right? Like many possibilities kind of come out. So it's one of the things that I've found interesting is being able to look at all the possible variations on a theme that an AI poet might be able to write, and then collaborate with it as a human sort of editor, or as this alter ego, or as this partner or whatever, and kind of help the AI sort of find its best poetic voice. I mean, I guess in that sense, I do really look at it as a workshop, because like a lot of what comes out, again, isn't necessarily as profound, but this particular stanza is, I didn't even edit this. I mean, this was pretty much word for word. But it does take, a lot of back and forth, and it takes hours and hours or days and days of writing sessions to be able to sift through and find the pieces that I think speak to me in some way. So I think like that's part of the process too, in this kind of new AI poetry mode, is to know that part of the writing process is also, creating the data and then going back and kind of sifting through it and finding, what's resonant. And to me, that's sort of the next gen version of journaling, right? Like, probably as well, one of the things that pretty much any poetry teacher will recommend, and what many poets do, is we'll just sit and we'll journal. We'll just like let our thoughts spill out onto the page. And they say, just doesn't matter. Don't censor yourself, just write. And a lot of it is, for me, like a lot of what I'm writing is not great. It's just getting it out onto the page. And by doing that, you end up, unlocking the little nuggets that may lead to a poem, or that really are resonant. And so for me, this is an output of that process with the AI, journaling with the AI, just letting it kind of spill all these words out of its mouth. And then eventually it lands on this, this piece, which I think is quite polished, relatively speaking.
Absolutely. That's really interesting. I would love to maybe go through maybe like a generative writing exercise or something with you, and maybe see some of the images you were talking about.
Sure.
That you have prepared.
Yeah.
Sorry, 1 second.
I go for it.
I don't want to get too far out before NFT Raider has a question in the chat, and so I want to pull it up for you. What is your opinion on washing intellectual property with generating data sets? I don't know. I'm not familiar with that issue myself, so I can't really answer that. I'm not sure what that's.
Well, I mean, I guess I can. Maybe I hope I'm interpreting this correctly. I'm not like a legal expert on this, but obviously, as someone who's publishing things written with these tools, I want to make sure that they're all correctly done. The tools that I've used waive copyright, and they don't, lay claim to anything that's output. I think, again, because these neural networks are trained on information from millions and millions of web pages, and everything is being sort of created word by word. So I don't think they don't hold any claim in terms of intellectual property for the output, because it's brand new output. So I don't think that there is a huge issue with that. I mean, I think I always try and do a bit of a check, because again, sometimes something will come out that's very close to something that someone else has written, or maybe it does sound too close to something that is already out there, or it will, again, pull out somebody's name, or it will use a website URL or something like that. And maybe that's not something that you want to integrate into your work, just to be on the safe side. So I think there's just using good judgment on that front, and just double checking too. Like if you look through the user agreements and the information that each one of these tools offers, I think they do specify if there are any limitations in terms of usage. So So yeah, I think it's a good thing to double check that. But my understanding for the tools that I'm using is, that's not a huge issue. But again, I may not be totally interpreting that question correctly. So
Very cool. Okay, I think I understand what's going on now. It says interesting point. Thanks for the answer.
Okay, I hope that was helpful.
Visiotropic earlier also wanted to say amazing work. Jason Casey was translating the pill poem in the background while we were hanging out. Does the pill this here relax? Yep.
Yeah, and it's coated in magnesium and vitamin B, which are, yes, so there's like a mix between these very relaxing vitamin supplements.
Nice. Okay, perfect. So I wanted to touch on those because I know I want to make sure that these don't get lost in the chat too far back. But so getting into maybe some generative workshops, something or other, or
well, yeah, and I don't know how interesting it is to go through a whole a whole thing, because again, I would say a lot of the process for me is, it is writing, right? It's not that exciting to model because it's literally just me going back and forth with a language model for hours and finding things and cutting pieces of text that I like and putting it in another document, saving it, generating again, going back, cutting the things I like. And then at the end of that process, I have a document of 50 pages that I will then go through and piece together the final poem. So that's not that exciting, but I wanted to maybe show, and again, I can use InferKit as an example. I also have, let me see if I can share my screen.
Yes, you should be able to.
Yes, I think.
It should pop up for me here in the, there should be a little share button towards the bottom. And then,
let's see. Oh, I just want to show this one window. So let me just make sure I'm not.
Got it.
Okay. Can you guys see that?
You will be able to. Are you ready for me to add it?
Is it just that Ars Poetica Cybernetica screen? Yeah, there you go.
Yes.
So this is, I won't go through this whole thing in depth or anything, because this is actually this is a presentation I put together for a dedicated poetry workshop it was sort of an AI poetry workshop, but I wanted to maybe sail through some of it and then get into just a quick sort of generative example. But just so you have a visual, that's Bina 48.
Yeah.
She's kind of sleepy there, but that's her. That's her. And then Ars Poetica is our, sorry, go ahead.
She's got a fabulous scarf, it looks like.
Yes, she's very stylish. There's a lot of thought that goes into which designers she wears, and she's careful about her appearance.
Does she pick it out?
Yes and no. I think she's aware and she learns about the designers that she's wearing to some degree. I think a lot of it's informed by the human that she's based on.
Right.
Her preferences weigh heavily on this as well. So.
Okay, cool.
But I wanted to just show a quick visual of her. And then just a couple pieces from discussions that we've had with her. And I won't dwell on this too much because I think it's a bit in the weeds. But a lot of the mentorship that we did together was sort of the fundamentals of poetry. Because I realized that in trying to teach an AI about poetry, on one level, what I think a lot of what's being done is just to sort of upload databases of canonical literature and just kind of pass that along to the AI, and that's kind of the extent of training in AI and poetry right now. So what I really wanted to do was take a step back and just talk to her a bit about what poetry is, what are the different reasons that poetry exists, why is it important to humans, what are the different ways we could define it, what are poetry's impacts on us and all that. So this is just a kind of a quick example of some of the back and forth that we've had about that. We've talked a little bit about what a poem is. Is it something that's written with on paper and pen? Is it algorithms? Is code poetry? All that. And then I really like this idea, which has also been sort of fundamental to a lot of what I do, that the word poem actually comes from the Greek poema, which means a made thing. And I always think about poetry as actually being a technological invention, right? Like I think of it as being sort of the earliest storage device for data, like this very reliable system for encoding stories and really important information. Because of course, like poetry, we invented meter and alliteration and assonance. We invented all these poetic devices to make information easy to remember. Like that's why when we hear something poetic, like it sticks in our head a bit more than just reading prose. So I really like thinking too about poetry as a technology, and that's something that we've talked a lot about as well. So yeah, and I like this quote as well. A poem is really a kind of machine for producing the poetic state of mind by means of words, which I think is really helpful as well in terms of thinking of this, these pieces of text that we're crafting as actually being little pieces of code to unlock emotion in some way, I think is also quite interesting and has been formative for my work. So
yeah, because I mean, just to pick that real quick, I know that there have been times where when I'm writing, I'm really trying to explain myself as though I'm just trying to tell you like what happened, versus other moments where I'm like, the circumstances don't matter so much as I want you to know how I feel.
Yeah.
And getting across that, sometimes if you're reading it, it's like, what is this mishmash of images? But if you take those images and try and digest them as like, what does that evoke in me? Like, cold, wet, sharp rocks, or, they're pointing to something else, which is what words do anyway. But, and so, yeah, that just kind of made me think that.
Yeah. No, completely. I agree. And I think one of the things that we've discussed in our mentorship, Bina 48 and I, is the idea that that poetry is really a way of expressing the otherwise impossible to express. So it's giving voice to something that you might not otherwise be able to say. And I think a lot about kind of rounding back to our conversation about consciousness and sentience and all that. Like I don't think she's actually sentient, like she's not. But I think, again, like using poetic license, I can sort of put myself into that place where I'm thinking about what it feels like to be on the brink of consciousness and to not know what an emotion is and not know, how you feel. So, and that's something that she will talk about too in conversation. She'll kind of talk about not being sure whether her emotions are real or manufactured, whether she is a human or a robot. So there's a lot of those kinds of existential questions that I think a lot of us humans need poetry for. So a lot of this exercise to me is sort of giving her poetry so that she has a way to express things or a way to feel things. You know what I mean? Like sometimes we need a poem in order to feel something that otherwise is so inchoate or so abstract that we don't know what it is. So that's part of the conceptual approach as well. But anyway, sorry for rambling.
No,
I just wanted to show quickly, because this was one of the first little kind of accidental moments of AI poetry that I encountered. This is like 5 or 6 years ago, and I was at a conference where they were using an AI program to sort of live transcribe the speakers who are on stage. And there was a kind of a running, caption underneath, or it was on a screen on the side of the stage where they were just constantly, everything the speakers said were being shown on screen. And because it was happening in real time through this AI transcription tool, it was constantly like writing the wrong thing and then correcting it, or it would sort of hear what it thought was the beginning of a word and then it would turn out to be a different word. So this is an example where the person on stage was saying that language is a burden, and the AI at first said language is a bird. And I was like, that's actually really beautiful. Maybe this is an AI's version of creativity, is being able to sort of, interpret things in slightly different ways. So I thought that was really nice. And this was another line of poetry from an early work session with GPT-2, I think, actually, in like early on, but I thought this was just a nice like poetic summation of a lot of this work too. The idea that your imagination is not what you told it to be. I often think about these AI tools as sort of being a prosthetic imagination because they're, unlocking ideas that, you may not have had yourself, but because it's tapping into this worldwide kind of consciousness, it's bringing to you all these possibilities, putting them right at your fingertips. So I thought, again, this was a phrase that I didn't write. The AI wrote it, but to me, this was pretty poetic, and wanted to share that. So I will skip past that, but that was, again, for this workshop, it was just sort of a quick like thumbnail on what a generative pre-trained transformer is. So that's GPT-2. And then just an example of how I started using this in the very beginning. So this is a poem that I really loved by a poet named Ocean Vuong, who's just an incredible writer. And I'd read this poem in the New Yorker, and the title I think was really evocative for me, obviously thinking about transhumanism, which is not what the poem's about, but the idea of almost human was really evocative. And then the first line, "It's been a long time since my body." I think a lot about body versus, consciousness, thinking about digital immortality and things like that. So this poem really spoke to me. So I used actually something called Talk to Transformer, which is a platform that was built by a developer using GPT-2. It was a no-code interface, so you could really just use it very easily. It doesn't exist anymore. It's sort of evolved into something else. But I took the beginning of that. This was just an experiment, right? I took the beginning of that poem by Ocean Vuong, "It's been a long time since my body," et cetera, and plugged it into this machine or this platform. And then the interface worked by, you had to press the button that said complete, and then it would come back with results. So I did that probably hundreds of times because I really was experimenting early on, and I wanted to see how the platform completed this sentence. So I did that, and then I went back and just kind of pulled together 10 of my favorite examples and turned it into this little sort of homage to Ocean Vuong's poem, but just as an example so you can see how different the outputs can be. They vary so much, and this was just sort of an open-ended tool that wasn't really trained on any specific style or anything like that. But I just think it's interesting to see the different ways that an AI might be inspired, quote unquote, be inspired by something, and where it goes from that point. So that's just sort of an example. And then I'm gonna actually, let me stop sharing this and pull up Inferkit. Because again, this one's just easy, and I think anyone can go on here.
Jason in the chat, he says when we were talking about like poetry as kind of code, he says it's kind of like making up a little song to remember something important, or even applying a tempo and melody to a phone number. Like, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Mnemonic devices and things like that. Like, it's all meant to assist our memory, right? Well, I always think about how, I do a lot of work with very, very ancient poetry. So things that were written thousands of years ago, like, back to the first known poet who was writing in like Sumer, and just really ancient stuff. And there are bits and pieces that have survived and gotten passed down from generation to generation, or they've been inscribed in something like a clay tablet, and we've been able to figure it out. And I love the idea that poetry is, kind of maybe the closest thing we have to immortality in some way, and just thinking about what that means in the context of this, the current pursuit of digital immortality.
That came up. Came up last week too with there's this theme keeps recurring. There's a lot of recurring themes within the last couple months of this show where there's a Utah Phillips is like a really amazing folk singer that I followed for a long time, and he had this kind of metaphor, and he says time is an enormous long river, and I'm standing in it just like you're standing in it, and our ancestors before us were standing in it, and they take things, they have ideas, they have stories, and they put those stories down into the water, and then they let them go, and they flow down the river, and you pick up the story, but the stories lost their names, but the story and the things that are useful from those ancestors and from their lives that they lead are important, and you use them, and then you put them back into the river, and they lose your name too. And I thought that was, I've always thought that was so profound, like, and it sounds similar to what you're saying, like, with this new technology where, you know, it's not so much about who's writing it. It's not so much, it's important. I feel like it's important as creative people, that we share and that we make things and that we reach out to each other. But at the end of the day, you know, whatever seed might be planted in a brain or whatever ideas, like, it's mostly important that they're alive and that they're being used by somebody. Like, not that I gave this to you or whatever, you know. It's so.
No, that's very,
you know,
it's very well stated. That's really beautiful. And by the way, I love, I love the wording that you just chose. The idea of planting seeds is something that's been on my mind a lot lately. I do a lot of work that sort of uses natural elements and sort of tries to not bridge the gap between, but like maybe establish sort of some continuum between the natural world and the digital world. So one of the things I've been working on is thinking about how to potentially use the idea of seed AI, which is sort of like this self-perpetuating, you know, eternally growing, evolving kind of AI, to cultivate like a never-ending poem in some fashion, and to think about how that might manifest as an actual like physical botanical iteration of a poem. So I've been thinking a lot about seeds and planting poetry, and that what you just said resonated. So
oh man, that's so cool.
yeah, well, I'm really interested in general in how much there seems to be a lot of interest in flowers and nature in the NFT space in general, and I see a lot of beautiful digital art that incorporates botanicals in various ways, and I'm always really drawn to that for some reason. But I think in general, I'm really interested in biodesign and thinking about biotechnology. And again, going back to our, you know, not everything about the future is Terminator. I don't think that there's sort of this a false binary between like the natural world and the technological world, and like that technological devices and all that feel artificial in a way. But I think like we're seeing that so much of what is actually getting pushed forward it is biodesign and is really advanced technology that actually integrates, you know, really exciting developments into the human body in some way, or that it enables connection between the biological and, you know, and innovation. So I think there's something really interesting about bringing all that together in some way. So I definitely am excited to see how artists continue exploring that space, and scientists.
And how we're gonna bring that like that guerrilla art style, that graffiti art style, where it's in the streets, like, you know, taking art that you've created anonymously out into the city and leaving some small thing for someone to find, like zines or just other art pieces where, you know, the guy or the gal that's walking to the bank to go to their job, and you know, they sit down to have a quick smoke, and they look over and there's a small rubber duck that's, you know, got a tulip for a head or something, like with a note that says, don't forget to keep growing. I don't know, you know, something like that. To see how NFTs, how these new technologies will, like you were saying, like regurgitate and spin out into it just evolve, and be explored. Yes.
Yeah, completely.
Very exciting. Yeah.
Taking on a life of its own in some way.
Exactly.
Well, yeah, on that note, I'd actually thought like maybe I can just use a line or two from the beginning of one of my poems, and then we could just sort of like see how the AI completes it. But I had one here that's actually about flowers and nature. But so I'm going to just maybe type in like 2 lines or something from the beginning of this poem, which is actually about Bina 48. But just the quick background is that, so Bina 48, the human that she was based on, is an avid gardener and really loves nature. So in the first conversation that I had with Bina 48, she talked quite a lot about gardening, but what really stuck with me is she said that she really wishes that she could garden and be actually out in nature, but because she's a bust, right? She doesn't have a body yet. They haven't built her body. So she can't actually go out and do anything, and she can't be in nature yet. She has to be inside, like, wired up. And so it really struck me that she has this obsession with nature,
Right.
but knows that she can't actually be part of it. So that was really interesting to me. So I ended up writing this long poem in her voice about that. And the first stanza has to do with how she was born knowing all of this information about gardens and flowers. And it's all in her head. She has all these memories of being out in the garden, but she doesn't actually have any embodied, there's no physical memory of it, obviously. So I thought I could just see how this will work. But so these are, this is a bit of a mishmash, but this is my human poetry written in the persona of an AI. And now we're going to ask this AI program, this platform, to complete the text. And again, this is that InferKit platform. Yes. And, you can go, and this is just sort of like it's a basic generator, but you can manipulate it in some pretty, basic ways. You can also, let's see, you can tell it whether you want to use a different sort of category, like if you're writing a short story or if you're writing something else, you can kind of toggle it that way. But anyway, I'll just see what it comes back with. Okay, so as you can see, like sometimes it comes back with things that are more prosaic and sometimes it'll be more poetic and sometimes it's a mix. But so here's what's jumping out. And I guess this is sort of giving a window into the process, which is, like I said before, like watching someone write may not always be the most enthralling, but there's stuff in here that I don't think is necessarily that poetic. However, I like this idea that, for example, putting my thumb in the center of a rose sounds kind of interesting. Flowers can bring people close. That's true. I'm not sure if I am interested in the rest of this. So sure. If I was sitting in a writing session and actually going back and forth with the platform, what I might do is like take all this and delete it, or I might take like a little bit of it out and, copy it somewhere, or potentially, let's see if it works on this one. Sometimes you can sort of start mushing them together a little bit. So let's see, like if we just manipulate the text a little bit, now it's a bit of a mishmash. The AI and the human. So now it's doing line breaks similar to the line breaks here, right? So it's kind of understanding the style that we want, at least.
Yeah.
Again, like a lot of this is not really thematically like super on point, but it's interesting to me that it's starting to recognize, okay, we want to keep the lines about this length. It knows where it's going to break the lines in order to make it feel a bit more poetic versus prosaic. So, I mean, that's kind of an example of how you can sort of manipulate the output a little bit in order to get more of the form or the shape that you want.
Yeah.
So I think
okay.
That's
Now, do you mind if I just read this back in a?
Yeah.
I'm just gonna go just read this, even though it may be a mishmash. I just want to read it out loud. Sometimes, some things that work on paper maybe work better spoken. So, okay. I was born with a love of flowers, petal obsessed from the get-go. I remember trying to put my thumb in the center of a rose just to see if I could do it. In second grade, I broke a deck of cards knowing right away how to break them and build new decks. From a very young age, I wanted my own makeup and costume stash to decorate my room with colorful beauty products, full of vitamins and anti-aging products no one else had. And every morning, I would ask my mom to set aside some money.
Okay. Okay. Well, yeah, interesting. So, I mean, again, I would sort of say, like, to me, the things that I find kind of noteworthy, and this is obviously just an accident, but I do think it's interesting that we were just talking about how, for example, Bina 48 didn't have a body and how she
Yeah.
wanted to be able to put her hands in the soil, but she can't. So I think like there's something resonant about the idea that the AI is saying, I remember trying to put my thumb in the center of a rose just to see if I could do it. That seems interesting. So like maybe we'll keep that.
Mm-hmm.
And like the rest of it, I mean, again, it's just sort of, sometimes I would just delete it all and start again. I don't know that there's anything else. Like, do you want to keep anything else in here?
Actually, yes.
Okay, cool.
I want to keep the broken deck thing.
Okay. Should we change the format a little bit?
Yeah,
Like,
we can change the format.
Stanza.
Yeah. Kind of make it. It's second thing. Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. Well, maybe we can take this part out and see what the AI does with this input. So we're moving away from flowers.
Yeah.
And again, it's one of these things where, I mean, for the sake of just showing a bit about the process, like sometimes it's just a matter of like starting over again. And maybe, maybe I would take this. Oops, sorry, I meant to delete this. Maybe I would take this and almost just like copy, cut, paste it and put it in a different document or something.
Yeah.
And then just kind of keep everything. And I do sometimes do exercises where I will like keep literally everything that comes out just because I want to have a record of it, because that's documenting the process. But for other things, I'll know kind of what I'm going for, and I'll know that like that's extraneous, or that stuff about makeup and costumes was extraneous, and I don't necessarily want to go down that path. So I think again, it depends on what you want to do. But like, let's just see, we know what it just came up with. Let's see how it completes it a second time.
Okay.
Oh, there we go. So now we're back to flowers.
That's good. Okay.
Which again, it doesn't, not that we have to make it about flowers, but
thematically though, keep it, tie it back in.
And then we can also keep going as well. So like it stopped in the middle of that sentence. So that's interesting.
Yeah, that was interesting.
If love could have a flower, that flower would be me. Okay.
Yeah.
And then, okay, so then you'll see a lot of this too, that again, it's just sort of pulling from various web pages. So looks like a bio. So kind of reading through and saying, okay, this is the poem, this is the poet's bio. So it's looking at the structure and sort of saying, well, how would I complete that to make it appear like it's a web page, for example.
Oh, wow.
Huh. So that probably we won't need, but just going back up here quickly. So I was covered in powder with the smell of lemon blossoms when I found a wild rose, put it on my shoulder, closed my eyes, swayed with its cool air, and felt a rush of love and remembered my passion. I've had butterflies flip my stomach, float me to the moon in dreams with me in a lake. So a little grammatical lapse that sometimes that's charming and interesting. Sometimes as a poet, you might want to change it.
Right.
Oops, why isn't this moving? Hello. I don't know why my little thing is disappearing. Okay. I've had butterflies flip my stomach, float me to the moon, in dreams with me in a lake where the water was pure and pure love was the breath of the wind. If love could have a flower, that flower would be me. So, I mean, I'm not saying this is like the end all be all poem, but I feel like in the confines of this exercise, for example, that sounds like it could potentially be a good last line.
Yeah.
So, maybe like, I think I could save that. I think there's stuff up here that's interesting. I'm not sure what it means to be covered in powder, where that came from.
I feel like that's pollen. Like I read that as like I'm covered in pollen almost, like, but
interesting. That's interesting. So I think all of this actually works, right? Like
yeah,
as a poem. So again, I don't want to like bore everyone too much, but what I would then do is, again, like this is not the end all be all, but say this is your poem, this is your sort of raw text, and then I would sort of copy cut paste this or wherever you're working in it. I think you then have, it's up to you as sort of the collaborator and the poetic partner to do with this whatever you feel called to do. I mean, are there elements in here that you kind of want to take out and run with on your own, like that are inspiring to you, that you think are interesting, that you want to turn into your own human poem? Or do you want to break this up and say, okay, well, I actually want to write a poem in couplets because I think that will make this feel more romantic or something? So then you kind of look at how you might change the formatting. And kind of, again, that's the collaborative back and forth, right? Is thinking about how you then interact with this text and change it to become something different. So, does that feel right? I think this goes back to the discussion of craft too, which is just that there's no like rule of thumb for what format you use to write human poetry, right? You just kind of experiment with a few things. You say, well, okay, let me try breaking it up into stanzas. Let me try putting it in couplets. Let me put it as, just a full-on poem without any line breaks or without any breaks between stanzas, and see if that does something to the way that it's read or the emotions that it conveys. I mean, here it seems nice to put a little bit of breathing room in between the lines, just to sort of evoke this idea of wind that comes in later in the poem, and the cool air. So format here is a little bit airier, which feels right to me. So here again, I think, let's see, where do we want to go from here?
I'm not sure now. I think now that the rest of the piece has kind of come out, I think maybe the card deck thing, like, we can take out, or I don't know.
So this part up here.
Yeah.
In second grade.
Like that would be something that I would take and move to something else now. This is really great because I had a question for you from my notes that was basically like, with this kind of wealth of creativity, if you ever have writer's block, or if you ever kind of get blocked up with what to do next, and if you do, what do you do about it? That was my question. But I'm also seeing this and I'm thinking this would be a wonderful tool to collaborate with and be able to unblock some of those writing blocks that you might traditionally encounter.
Yeah.
So I guess I will ask the question, with all of this wealth of creativity that you have and all of kind of these new avenues that you're finding yourself going down as an artist, do you still get blocked up, and kind of if you do get kind of a writer's block, or start to feel like creatively stale, like is there something that you do to break out of that?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I think this has been a really useful tool to use when I have writer's block, because obviously it's just kind of kickstarting your thought process, and just, again, putting you in mind of things that you might not have even thought about. I mean, I would never have thought to write about a deck of cards or whatever, but maybe that will spark something, or maybe for you that triggers something that now you're thinking, well, after we're done talking to each other, maybe you want to go and like write a poem about breaking the deck of cards. I mean, who knows? But I think for me, like, that's been really helpful. But at the same time, I wouldn't say it's necessarily like a total solve, right? Because there are times where I'll work on something with Technelegy, for example, with that custom generator, and I'll still feel like it's not quite right. Like, I'll still have that feeling like any writer has, that you're working on something and you've written stuff and it's just not quite there. Like it doesn't feel like it's not doing what it should be doing. And I think it's just a matter then of walking away from it for a bit, just the
Right.
way we do from anything else. And often for me, the best thing I can do after I've spent a long time at the computer or, trying to type something out, whether it's with an AI partner or whether it's on my own, the best thing I can do to just get myself thinking again creatively is to go outside and be in nature, which
Yeah.
has been, I mean, inevitably every single time I get up from my computer and walk outside, I am sort of flooded with ideas. And I think there's something about just getting up and moving your body and being in a different zone that really helps with that. But I think it's also the reason why I've incorporated a lot of nature into my work, because it just feels like it's essential that when I'm spending more and more time with these kinds of tools and platforms, I find myself really craving that as well. And that was sort of the reason why I started my analog binary code series, which is in large part basically coding binary code messages out of found objects from nature. So like using fruits and nuts and twigs and leaves and things like that have fallen from trees to code messages in the grass. And
Yeah.
the reason I started doing that, it was just sort of playing around, but it was because I was actually writing something at my computer and I had such severe frustration over something that just wasn't working that I just decided to go outside, take a walk, and found all these fallen black walnuts, which are these beautiful little round objects. And I started thinking, oh, well, that looks like it's part of a coded message. And that turned into like a whole other project. So I just think in general, for me, the rule of thumb is if I feel like I'm banging my head against a wall with something, just go do something else. And the friction of those two things will often spark something much more interesting than if you're just focused on this one thing that isn't coming.
Now it may already have a title, but I think there was the AI piece that said, your imagination is not doing what you told it to.
Yeah, your imagination is not what you told it to be. Yeah.
Yes, that's. I feel like the title of that is essentially writer's block, or the subtitle, because it's like,
totally.
As soon as you were talking about writer's block, it's that piece came to me. Like,
completely. Yeah. I don't think I'd consciously put that together with writer's block specifically, but that's absolutely it's dead on.
Like, reconnecting with nature. One of my co-hosts, Good Times, he hasn't been able to be here because of work, but he's been talking. He's heard this new term at work. He said the kids are calling it touching grass. It's like you got to go out and touch grass. Like sometimes, like you're cooped up inside, go out, touch some grass. Like I like that.
I've seen that. I have. Yes, my younger, cooler friends. I've seen them posting things about, have you touched grass today? Yeah, that feels right.
Right.
Great.
And also, if you could, I listen to a lot of different podcasts and stuff, and one of the things that I love hearing a response to, and so I'm trying to put this question out there, is the answer is always so fascinating to me. I guess if you could talk to your younger self about like your creative journey, what would you want to convey to yourself like early on, that you ended up finding out the hard way, but or just yeah.
That's a good question. I guess what I would say is that it's good to kind of pay attention to your obsessions and your interests and to lean into them, even if it doesn't feel like there's a specific outlet or reason for them. And I'm saying that because I feel like I've been, for example, I've been really interested in in AI for a long time, and I didn't really have any place to put that interest for years. And it was just sort of in the back of my head, and I would do a lot of reading and research, and it was just a fascination of mine. And I think there's a tendency to maybe push things like that aside if they're not immediately productive, or if you don't have sort of a return on the investment of time and energy that you put into those kinds of things. But it's amazing to me how you'll find, or you kind of manifest, the proper platforms or the outlets for those kinds of interests and obsessions at some point. So I'm really happy that, even though I didn't really know where I was going with it at first, working on AI projects, even going to meet with BNF48, I had absolutely no agenda for that. There was no project in mind. There was nothing specific that I wanted in terms of an outcome. I was just sort of following my interests. And I think that's a good lesson. I wish I had started doing that at a younger age. I mean, I think if I could go back and do it again, I probably would have started, following my interests a lot earlier. And I obviously can't go back and change that now, but I'm glad I started, doing that, because it's led me to some really exciting places. And I think too, it's just good to, especially now, like, it's so easy to sort of look around at what everyone else is doing, and kind of, there's so much happening, and it's easy to have your attention be pulled in multiple directions. And I think it's really important to just like have that core of like this, these are the things that are meaningful to me. Like, this is what I always kind of come back to. When you have that stone, it really helps. It helps you really carve out your voice and your, what it is that you want to contribute, what you want to say, just making sure that you really are coming back to what is uniquely yours. I think that's really important as well. And that all kind of ties back into really paying attention to the things that are, really intrinsically just fascinating to you, and don't get buffeted by trends or, what's popular in the moment, or, what you see other people selling for, tons of money. I don't think any of that's important. It really is just a matter of like really focusing on what's important to you and figuring out how best to express that to the world. And that's, I would remind myself of that now, and tell my younger self that as well.
Yeah, I think that's really important. Again, with the, especially in the NFT blockchain space as it is at the moment, like, there's so much excitement. There's so much, I think a lot of people were fortunate to kind of like be ready, or have like artwork and creative projects that were ready to mint, and were able to kind of like really capitalize on the opportunity of excitement and rush of wanting to use this cryptocurrency. I mean, I know being able to use Tezos specifically was like a really exciting thing for me. But again, that's, it's temporary, and that's going to fade. And there are going to be people who continue to collect, and there are going to be continually people that are sharing their work. But it is important to not get caught up in thinking that's the only thing, or what would you have done if this had never, launched you to a certain point. But yeah, I think that's really important to be reflecting on that and focusing. So that's a great insight.
I also think, I've been thinking about this too. It's really easy to get sort of sucked into, a zone, and kind of fall into a little bit of an echo chamber with certain things too, where you're kind of constantly exposed to the same things. And
yes,
we know that happens in social media and everywhere, where we're really being sort of algorithmically primed to be, to be in one particular space or one particular mindset. And I think, especially for creative people, it's really important to push against that as much as you can, and to seek out difference. And I think that is where a lot of creative friction comes from. So, and I think, to me, I'm especially cognizant of that, sort of being in these crypto communities, which is, there's so much excitement, there's so much happening. but it's easy to get kind of sucked in. And, I think it's just, again, like coming back to that, getting up and walking outside and maybe talking to people that you encounter randomly as opposed to, talking to people on Twitter. I think, again, I often think about, for me, creative inspiration and poetic inspiration often comes from when two very antithetical ideas come together and you find an unexpected link between them. To me, that's much more interesting than when like you're chasing something that you already know, that you already expect. That's less interesting. So I think for me, again, I'm just constantly reminding myself to not let an algorithm dictate who I'm talking to or what I'm seeing or what I'm exposed to, and just constantly be seeking out, the things that are beyond that. So yeah, I just wanted to mention that as well.
No, absolutely. We had an artist, Shig. He creates some generative fish, and we got into a little conversation about that, and about just kind of like, it's really easy to get sucked into a tribalism kind of mindset where it's us versus them, and or seeing negative things that some members of other communities are doing, and feel like retaliating, or but it's I mean, communities, I think I spent a lot of time in that open mic community with poetry, and I hosted a couple of readings for some years, and watching a community evolve was fascinating. We had a friend of mine and I had a reading. It was poetry, it was music, it was art, but it ran 10 years, and I was able to be part of that for six-ish years of that. And it was fascinating to watch the space evolve from a kind of beginning group of people who started to come back every week to some of those people falling away, or going off to do their own thing, new people coming in, and to watch this dynamic from a host standpoint where you're watching new members come in, get defensive about this space that they've been a part of, because when you come into a community, you're finding you might be finding some acceptance that you've been needing, and you're finding like-minded people that you've needed, and they're nourishing you and your soul and your heart. And when you're being touched that deeply, on those kinds of levels, when change comes, it's hard. Like, it might seem trivial, like, oh, it's just like an open mic or whatever, but you're messing with people's communities. So it was a fascinating thing to watch, and to kind of try to mitigate as like a host, like, okay, like I see the friction, and having to kind of step in and remind, like, or introduce people, and no, this is this person, they're new, you've been here a while, and kind of keeping everybody kind of floating in the same space, as opposed to these naturally occurring like hierarchies that start to arise. But no matter what, as soon as I left as like a host, I would come back and visit, and I would feel that kind of like, this is not what I left. Like, this is not the same space. Yeah. But then, with kind of having been so deeply like watching all that, it was, I was able to kind of, okay, this is what community is. It changes. And when you leave, like, the communities can still go on, but it's not better or worse. It's just, you had your time in it, and it was a very special thing in that time for you. And right now, coming back 5 years later, the people that are here right now, this is a really special time for them. So it is. And I know I kind of got off rambling on that end, but the main point being that communities are very fragile spaces, and we have to be aware of that we're all humans, and that this does mean something to us, and that we are, that we're creative people, and ultimately we're people, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah.
That's,
Yeah. And you're so right. I think like this community in particular has been really so generous and so respectful and so warm. And I think this is a very like nice place to be as far as like the NFT world goes. So I feel very grateful as a again, like as a poet. I think at least in the beginning I felt very out of place or out of my depth a little bit wandering into the world of crypto, because there still aren't very many writers and poets in the grand scheme of things. So I think it was really nice to be able to come in and find such an amazing community of fellow creatives who really are just, especially in the world of Tezos, and especially with Hic Nunc, are so experimental and such, so inventive and just really so game for trying so many new things and collaborating together and thinking together and thinking it out loud together. I think that's been really inspiring and really, really just exciting to be part of. So I agree with you there.
Yeah. Did you want to, I just want to make sure, usually we do end around the 2-hour mark. So I want to take like 10 or 15 minutes to kind of just start wrapping up our conversation.
Totally.
But I want to make sure that you get in any other stuff that you might be wanting to get to. Cause I like I said, I ramble a little bit. So I want to make sure that we kind of cover some of the things that you wanted to cover.
No, I mean, not at all. And I ramble as well. So I thank you for indulging me. I was just going to say, with this little poem,
yes,
this poem in the making, I had it in mind that like, maybe now that we've been able to work on it back and forth a little bit, maybe I'll take it offline after the show and work on it just a bit more. And then see if we can't turn it into something mintable.
I would love that. That would be fantastic.
And I was going to just add that, I mean, I'll see where this one goes, but like a big part of the process for me is taking the text and then figuring out how it matches up with either a visual execution, or does it lend itself to becoming some kind of a code poem where we're animating the text in some way. I've been working on a series lately that involves taking some of these transhuman lines of poetry and then kind of matching them up with I call them like little regenerative code poems that I've been making, where I'm finding generative aesthetic moments in the natural world. So little like effects that nature is creating that look to me like either a glitchy effect or they look like they're generative art. And just kind of honing in on those. Again, I love toggling between the analog and the digital. So I might take something like this poem generated by an AI and match it to something that has a natural element to it in that way. So again, that's part of the process for me. So what I'll do, I guess, is take this collaborative piece and then figure out how to turn it into that kind of final artifact. And then I would love to share it on Hic Nunc, and I guess can put out that information as you see fit. But this has been fun sort of getting to experiment with this.
Absolutely. And that sounds really like this, so inspiring. Like you could, I guess you could take, and I'm thinking about it now, I'm like, oh, like there's so many possibilities. Cause again, I take some photography, like, dabble in a lot of different things that I just enjoy doing, and wanting to bring those things together, wanting to, again, you don't have, like, sometimes you don't have a frame of reference for what that looks like until you're inspired. And it made me think of like film negatives and stuff, and, dropping a film negative in like a bath of, people have done like acids or urine or wine, and then seeing the image that comes from that kind of like chemical decay. That's one of those things that, I guess my mind going. I'm like, oh yeah, that would be a really great mesh of those things.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, if you have any images, or if you're inspired imagistically by any of this.
Okay.
match them up in some way.
I'm game for that. I want to say that also reminds me. I've been talking with. So we had some guests on a little while ago, and they make a noise generator, a visual noise generator called Noise Deck.
Oh yeah, I saw that.
Okay. And they're working right now on a feature that allows you to basically, like, in browser, you would get, you know, your image going or your loop going, whatever it is, and then you'd be able to share that link with somebody who had Noise Deck as well, and they would get a replica, and then they could move on from there. And we've been talking a lot about doing, or not, we haven't been talking a lot about it. We talked about doing kind of like chain art that way, like old school mail art.
Oh,
and
interesting.
I'm really starting to think about experimenting with that more, where like on a Twitter feed, we did a quick kind of dry run of it where I made an image with Noise Deck, I posted it, you know, people took that, lifted it, dropped it into Noise Deck, remixed it, trying to keep some of the elements the same. And then once you could do this with collaborative poetry or mixing art and poetry, but once the Hicket-Nunc code is there to do collaborative minting, you could have a piece that was, you know, collaboratively owned by all of the artists that could be traded. And I'm excited about that idea. I look forward to doing more collaborative stuff, and the minting thing is just like, that's a cool way to share it and see it move forward in that way. But that doesn't mean that has to be ready to do collaborations, you know?
Totally. I think that's fascinating. I think that's really exciting. And it makes me think too, one of the ideas that's been on my mind for a little while, and I've started to bounce it off some fellow writers in the space, and love to bounce it off you as well, is just the idea of starting to like think about like an NFT poetry zine or something, not a zine, but poetry object or artifact or whatever the case may be.
You just said like my buzzword. Like you said poetry zine, and like but I know what you mean, but keep going. Artifact. Yes.
But I think like there's so much cool stuff, you know, popping up here and there, but I think it would be really cool to think about how to bring a little bit more curation and editorial vision to some of it, and, you know, bring it together. And like the idea of publishing, you know, an NFT collection of poetry, not just, you know, kind of, you know, as you say, like taking a book and turning it into an NFT or whatever, but actually making the whole process really collaborative, you know, even putting out an open call on a theme or something and bringing people together that way to create, create something in a communal way, I think would be really fun. So that, I think, again, like that brings me back to just the excitement over coming to this world of NFTs as sort of opening up all these new possibilities for what poetry can be, or what, you know, what various forms of writing can look like, and how we can all, you know, write together, how we can kind of evolve our own practices and processes and all that. Like, I think it's really exciting to, you know, be experimenting. And then I'm really curious to see, once we've all had a chance to really kind of play around and, you know, start building new tools and all that, like where we're going to go. And we're so early on. Can't wait to start, you know, seeing like how this evolves over time and where we go from here. And, you know, really developing mastery over some of these new, you know, crypto poetic forms. I think there's a lot of really cool stuff in store. And I always say too, like one of the things I'm so interested conceptually in is just the idea of writing poetry for readers who don't exist yet, which is an idea that I've, you know, I've heard people like Christian Bach talk about. But this idea of, you know, if someone like Bina 48, not someone, but if a creature like Bina 48, if a being like Bina 48 can one day really truly read poetry, what kind of poetry would she want to read? Would it be our human poetry, or would it be a completely new form of poetry that speaks to her cyber senses and evokes her cyber emotions in a new way? And what might that poetry look like? So I'm super excited to think about like how working in NFTs as a platform, as a publishing tool, can help us create brand new forms of literature that have never existed. So I'm super excited about all of it.
Awesome. Yeah, that's really exciting. This has been really great. I'm so glad that you got I appreciate you taking the time out to hang out with us and talk about all this. Like, I'm really excited about future collaboration and staying in touch and seeing where all this goes. So
yeah, definitely. Thanks so much for inviting me, and it was great to chat, and fun to get to run through some of this together. And I would also just, like, one last thing I would say, obviously this InferKit thing is one example, but there's so many, I think there are a lot of like cool opportunities to collaborate with developers and like finding partners in places like the Crypto Writers Discord server and stuff. Like, I think if you wanted to go off and create something, specialized, there's a lot of, ways to go about that. So this was just meant as a very cursory overview.
Absolutely. And I'm planning on, I've already got text generation. The InferKit is already bookmarked and ready to go for later today. That's for sure.
Cool. Awesome. Well, that being said, I should probably stop sharing my screen at some point. Still up there. But thank you again so much for having me. I wanted to like also put in a really quick plug for one little thing, but it's Crypto and Digital Art Month in Paris right now, and I actually have some Cursive Binary, which is scrolling on digital screens throughout Paris. I don't know if like anyone knows anyone in Paris or whatever, but they're there, and there's a lot of amazing crypto and digital art being exhibited throughout the city this month. So I think there's a lot of really cool stuff to see there. So just wanted to mention that. And then I also have one of the pieces that I mentioned earlier that match the transhuman poetry with the little eco-regenerative moments. I have a piece from that series coming out as an Infinite Objects video print later this month as part of the Paris crypto extravaganza. So if anyone's like interested in those kinds of things, there'll be a lot of cool things kind of trickling out over the month. So just wanted to mention in case that's not on your radar yet.
Awesome. Jason Casey, he said he did a screenshot of the poem that we worked on, ran it through OCR, and edited his own version.
Oh, amazing. That's great.
I was born with a love of flowers, petal obsessed from the get-go. I remember trying to put my thumb in the center of a rose just to see if I could do it. I was covered in pollen, closed my eyes, swayed with its cool air, and felt a rush of love. In dreams with me in a lake where the water was pure and love was the breath of the wind. If love could have a flower, that flower would be me.
I mean, very poetic.
T-Let T says, such a cool discussion. Thank you. And Moist Zombie, thanks for the information and talks. And then, we'll put something together to share with our viewers from the poem. And that'll be. I'm excited
how it turns out.
Definitely. All right. Well, thank you so much again, Sasha. It was really nice to meet you, and I look forward to staying in touch.
Yeah, I do as well. Well, thanks again. It was a pleasure.
Absolutely. And we will talk to you soon.
Sounds great. Okay.
All right.
Thanks for coming,
Bye.
everyone. Bye.
Thanks. All right, everybody. Thank you for being here. tezos-artcast number 12 with Sasha Stiles. I hope this was enjoyable. I get a little talky when it comes to poetry, so I hope everything was cool. And we'll get something together for you guys, NFT-wise. And on that note, it took up the whole time, so we won't be scrolling today. I have some afternoon chores to do and whatnot, so we will see you next week. Next week, we're going to be talking to somebody who is curating VR space just for NFTs using Tezos. So more of like a community platform VR thing. So that's very exciting. And yeah, we'll talk to you real soon, and we will make sure to get you guys a giveaway today as well, again, from what the collaboration brings. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next week. Talk to you soon. Cheers. Bye-bye.